might have a Roosy bit on here.
Do it. Just wait for the old boy to figure out how to work out the IG Live. Oh, just request. There he is. Oh, mate, you nailed it.
Mate, got my IT expert and sorted it out, mate. Don't worry about that. Everything's under control. Just let me fix my hair. Hang on.
Yeah.
I've just realised you're able to look at yourself in this thing, are you?
Yeah, you are. You can see yourself the whole time. You are looking good.
That's good. I love this. What's it called? Instagram.
And you got your earpods and everything?
Mate, I've got everything going. Don't worry about that.
Mate, love it. I love it. Mate, so cheers for... Oh, you got a fan already. Who's that? Do you know Blake? He's like a bit of a fan. You got a few... He's pretty excited.
Oh, very good.
Down the bottom there, you can see people...
people... Jack, good on you, Jack. There's Jack joining. I think Grace is online. Blake's happy because Melbourne won.
Yeah, he was up and about.
He was up and about. Blakey.
Mate, so, you know, for the next sort of half an hour to 45, we'll have a bit of a chat. I won't take you till... I know you've probably got to tuck in Deals to bed soon, so we won't get you out too late.
Yeah, I got to read him a bedtime story.
Yeah. So, firstly, sort of what I want to do is sort of, you know, move back and talk a bit about sort of you and your sort of experience, you know, back when playing footy and then up into now with doing sort of leadership coaching. And for those of you that are on here that don't know Paul, so, you know, you spent most of your life, I'm guessing, you know, in professional sports, right? From playing through to coaching and then now working with professionals and corporates around performance and leadership. And so, you know, throughout that experience, I'd love to sort of get an idea of, for you personally, in terms of, you know, what you used to see as like self-care and looking after yourself, how that's evolved and changed over time. So, you know, when you were sort of a teenager or playing early days of footy, how did it look then and how has that changed to now?
Yeah, so, I mean, you talk about self-care, it's really just the body and not even really from a dietary point of view. I mean, I was born in 1963, so started, I guess, playing sport, you know, around about 8 or 9 years of age. So when you talk about self-care, was really just physical. So, you know, we were really fortunate to grow up in an era of a lot of outdoor activity. You know, we didn't have, you know, we had 4 channels, 7, 9, 10 and ABC, and we had Gilligan's Island, the Brady Bunch, F Troop, Get Smart. We had Pac-Man and Pong as games, not Fortnite. So yeah, it was very much an era of just get outside and do stuff. You know, diet was really simple. There wasn't a lot of information around diet. You know, a lot of it was around the family home as well. Like, you know, you'd always eat together as a family. You know, so you'd sit down and you'd have your sort of, peas and carrots and, you know, a schnitzel or whatever. So there wasn't, you know, it wasn't a bad eating regimen, but it wasn't, you know, by today's standards, the information wasn't there. So then I started playing football as a sort of 17-year-old, went down to Fitzroy. So then you learn more about your body. You know, it's just, it was all about your body, nothing about your mind. You know, we sort of, I can't remember whether we had access to sports psychologists, probably not until maybe the mid-90s. So most of the self-care was around activities, outdoor activities, and obviously being in a professional sport, we train 7, 8 times a week, morning and night. So it was just so much about your body. And obviously we got a bit more dietary stuff once we got inside a football club, but it really wasn't a lot of that. So when you talk about self-care back in the 70s and 80s, it was really just about body and that was about it.
Right. And so how does that, interesting point you made there, which I'm not sure if you think this is actually the case. It sounded like there was almost, because you were, naturally playing more and you have dinner at the table and there was less technology, did you feel like there was almost more personal connection going on back then than now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was all about community, whether that's the football team or the netball team for the girls, but equally school. It's all about your schoolmates. So you'd come home from school, you'd make a couple of bits of toast or whatever it might be, then you'd race outside, get on your bike, ride to your mate's house, kick the footy, play cricket, play basketball. There'd be a group 3 or 4. I remember some nights we'd have a game of footy. There'd be 10 guys, 5-on-5 in the park sort of thing. So 100%, it was just all about community, connection, belonging and activity, all rolled up in, that was just the life that we led.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you'd agree then that sort of really not lost its way, but that's not really part of, I guess, growing up as much anymore, right?
Yeah, it was interesting because Dylan asked me a question, I think it was sort of the end of last year, and he said to me, Dad, if you could grow up in any era, when would it be? And it was sort of like a
good question.
I don't know, that wasn't a shock, but it was like, wow, that's a really interesting question. So, it took a while and I thought, well, what are the pros and cons and what's on now and what's on then? And I literally couldn't think of a better time to have grown up than when I did, because of the very reasons we're talking about tonight. Because it wasn't a chore to reach out to someone. It wasn't hard to get outside and play. You didn't have to tell your son to get off the PlayStation, or stop. Like, homework is a huge issue now. And I'm saying it's an impediment. It's really an impediment to being a really well-balanced human being. I mean, when I went through school, homework? What was homework? There's no such thing as homework. I mean, year 12, for those that are listening in my generation, year 12 was our last year. They had a thing called SWAT-back, which was 10 days of study before your exam starts. And 100%, your whole year was based on your last exams. So if you wanted to, you could study. But if you didn't, you could cram it into 10 days and then you could take your exams and do your... So really, there was so much about family and connection and outdoors and things like that. So in long-winded answer to your question, it's challenging now. It really, really is, when you consider, how different it was back then. There was no, my point is, there was no effort to connect. It was just what you did. There was no effort to exercise. It was just what you did. I mean, my parents were great tennis players. They were members of the local tennis club. We used to go up, if we weren't playing tennis, we were playing basketball or football. And it wasn't like ours was an unusual lifestyle. It was just everyone did the same thing. It didn't matter how good or bad you were at sport. Everyone joined in, and everyone joined in the community. Yeah.
And so, I mean, obviously you mentioned that part of it wasn't much awareness or working, on the mind as such. It was all sort of around the body. But, do you think that there was just, I mean, apart from there being maybe less awareness around, mental health, there's probably potentially, you think, maybe less issues around it back then because you were so much more connected and physically active and healthy.
Go on. Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. Because, I mean, you didn't have the other things going through your brain, like what's such and such. I'm looking at Instagram, they're in Paris at the moment, they're in America. Oh, have a look at this guy called Dan Balzerian, he's flying a private jet, and, and you're not on Facebook and all those sorts of things. So your life, in a sense, was my alarm goes off, I jump out of bed, I put my clothes on, I have my breakfast, I go to school. The people you connect with are in front of them. They're there. You can see them. They're visual. They're not pie in the sky. So then you didn't really have to worry about what they were doing, because you knew that, if you were competitive, you knew you were either better than that kid next to you because you got a better grade, or you're worse. You're a better tennis player because you beat them, or you're worse. So everything was just really simple. And I see someone on the thing said that Dylan beat me 6-love, which is not true at all. I think my sister's on the line too, so she can verify some of this stuff. And Nick Fordham, a good mate of mine's on as well. So, but look, you're right. I think because you were less foggy growing up and you were more in tune with what you were doing every day, not what someone else was doing.
Yeah.
It was a really simple lifestyle. I think the fact we now consume what everyone else is doing. So imagine jamming that into your noggin now. I'm the same. Like if I look at my head in 1980 and compare it to my head now, it's just so different in terms of everything that's bubbling around and jumping around and going around in there. So as I said, it was just a relatively simple time, and you judged yourself on really simple criteria. Did I have a good day? Did I have a bad day? Did I pass the test? Did I fail the test? Did I play well at footy? Did I not play well at footy? It was a really simple time, but you're right. I think because of that, even though we didn't focus on our mental well-being, it just came a lot more naturally because we were out in nature a lot more. We're a lot more active. We're a lot more connected. So those things that probably are big impediments at the moment weren't impediments back then.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and with that, obviously you mentioned that, you know, what's going through your mind now compared back then is just, you know, tenfold. And obviously the amount of stimulus we're exposed to is pretty bloody solid. So for you then, what's shifted? So from just being mainly, you know, naturally out active and looking after more the body, what shifted for you then? Like, what have you, is it just the mental side of things? What are the things that you've brought in over the last sort of more recent period in terms of keeping yourself in check?
Yeah, look, I've been really fortunate. I mean, the AFL and sport, it truly is a high-performing industry. So it's very, very progressive. You know, we became full-time sort of mid to late 90s. So then obviously as a full-time industry, you had to start to think, well, we can only get a slight increment in how much weight we can lift and a slight increment in how you can improve your 3K time trial. So then, you know, Tammy and I, my wife, Tammy did a meditation course, you know, around about that time. And so then we started to think about, well, okay, if we've maximised the output of the body, well, there's got to be something to this mind that's happening. We've got to be able to improve the mind. So I functionally started meditating, and Tammy did. Tammy, as you know, did a PhD and wrote a dissertation on meditation. So then we started to bring that into a football environment, you know, along with things like, you know, yoga and Pilates and acupuncture. And as I said, football clubs are very proactive in trying to become the absolute best they possibly can be. So when we introduced meditation in 2003, it was non-compulsory at Sydney. Yep. But there was no, I mean, as you know, there's no doubt that it added to our ability to win a premiership in 2005. And it was no coincidence that some of our best performing players were the guys that meditated the most. You know, Adam Goods, Brett Kirk, Jude Bolton, Craig Bolton. You know, so then, as I said, AFL footy's progressed, you know, the mind, the eating, and all the other things that go with it, to the point now where it's so normal now to go to a football club and to really address every aspect of the being, not just the physical aspect.
Yeah. So, I mean, and having that experience of obviously yourself going through playing and then coaching, I'd love to, one of the big things we're always all about here, and you've done the work with us, obviously, in the values is around, you know, vulnerability and what we've struggled with. What would you say, you know, from a personal experience, like going through that period, what was some of the biggest things that you maybe struggled navigating as a bloke growing up in that performance world?
Yeah, it was interesting. Probably a couple. The first one, I mean, we were just taught to train hard, train longer, you know. So when all the science came into the game and, you know, we got told by the fitness staff, not told, I mean, it was always discussed, but, you know, look, we got to rest and, you know, this day on, day off notion. So as an old school athlete that just used to work as hard as you possibly could and put your runners on and do that, you know, you had to have a shift around science. You had to start to say, okay, well, all right, there's got to be some science. And once they sort of explained that to us, it was always a battle. You could imagine like an old bloke like me, you know, that, you know, oh, come on, why can't he train? And, you know, so there's always a battle, but I think I'm self-aware, and I think I've got a good understanding of what makes a high-performing team. As I said, when we started the meditation, I was doing it anyway. I mean, the vulnerability piece is quite amazing when you look at it from a footy club, because footy club is probably seen as the most blokey environment you can possibly have and the most closed environment you could possibly have. But there's no doubt, again, in terms of progression and what football clubs have done around relationships and vulnerability and empathy has been amazing. I mean, I remember Dave Misson, who was my fitness guy, he worked in cricket before me, and I don't know whether he came up with the idea or Steve Waugh or someone came up with the idea of you had to tell a cricket story, and you also had to tell a story about something outside of cricket. And he said to me one day, he said, "Look, do you mind if we started at Sydney?" And I'm like, "Okay, it sounds like a pretty cool thing." So when it started, it was, it was pretty funny and guys were doing, but after a while, like we had some really amazing stuff that players would do videos and all that sort of stuff. And then the next stage of that was when we started to really become vulnerable and you had to talk about, the most difficult periods of your life. And I've seen players in tears and coaches in tears and, but what it does, if you want to break vulnerability down to a high performing environment, what it does is it humanizes everyone. It connects everyone. Because if I know what you're going through as a human being, and as I said, some of them were, people had lost their kids and mums and dads and husbands. And they're really heavy stuff that we would discuss, but it brought a connection. So when we're talking about these terms, sometimes I find the English language quite funny. Sometimes we don't really articulate the word probably enough. When we talk about vulnerability, I think people sort of tend to think of it, I'm just going to tell everyone some, mushy stuff and they're going to laugh at me. No. It's connecting. It's connecting with people and telling your story so then you can understand my journey. If you understand my journey and in turn I understand yours, you understand mine, we've got this connection there. And then whatever we're in together, whether it's a business or a footy club or a family, then it becomes this bond that's really hard to shake. And that really is what vulnerability is. It really is a connection and dropping this armor that I grew up with and dropping this armor and saying, well, why wouldn't you want to be more connected to your business partner, your employees, your staff, your team, your coaches? It just makes sense. But I think when we put labels on some things, it tends to sort of scare people away a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it is, even the word saying it now sort of makes me feel like I want to share something deep and soft and woo-woo. And even though we're doing a little work on it, still there's this attachment to the word vulnerability being, I want to show my weakness, and it doesn't feel great until you get it out, and then it feels fucking amazing because someone comes back at you. So, you sort of place vulnerability in almost like a power and performance position. Like it's part of the fundamentals for growth and creating teams which perform better.
Yeah, my company now with the 3 business partners, Performance by Design, we do a lot around that. But it's really simple things like shout out at the start of the meeting. Does anyone want to talk about the biggest challenge this week? And you create little questions. Roos, you go first. Yeah, look, a challenge at home. As we just had a baby and it's been really hard for me. I'm getting up in the middle of the night. So you've got to practice it. Some things don't necessarily come naturally, but vulnerability, like anything else, you can practice. So at the start of every meeting, you can do your shout outs. What's been a challenge? What's biggest win this week? So absolutely, we use it, and it's imperative. You talk about what good leaders are now. Good leaders are vulnerable. Good leaders have great self-awareness, have great empathy towards their staff, their family, their friends, etc., etc. Poor leaders are the complete opposite. So if you want to create a high-performing team, you have to be able to create vulnerability within the workplace. It's just a no-brainer. It just has to be done.
Right. I'll jump into, I want to run down that leadership path in a sec, especially around the current times that we're going through. But I'd love to, you're in the thick of it working with, young sort of boys becoming men and especially guys being in the spotlight. And obviously now in both professional sports and business, are there some sort of themes that you see a lot of guys struggling with? Like, are there some things you're like, this is what I'm seeing a lot of guys are battling with at the moment, or are there sort of some little patterns that you're seeing?
I think there's still that sort of stereotype a bit that as a guy, you've got to be seen as strong. So we've got to and I know you guys are really big on this, is what does strong mean? We've got to change the narrative from strength meaning keeping everything inside and trying to do it yourself, to strength is asking for help. I think that's what I mean when I talk about the language and terms and phrases, et cetera, et cetera. So my idea now, if you had asked me 30 years ago, what's a strong bloke, I would say, yeah, unequivocally, a bloke that just gets shit done and sorts it out himself and doesn't ask for help, et cetera, et cetera. You know, so if you talk about the narrative and flipping the narrative, if you said to me, Roosie, what's a strong bloke? I'd say, oh, someone that reaches out, someone that says, you know, that I'm wrong and I got it wrong, and someone that is prepared to ask questions and ask for help. So the narrative is just being flipped. But there's still, as you know, there's still this battle that's going on in the male brain. You know, is that strength? And we've just got to keep reminding people, yes, it is. Because every time I see a young person, you know, when I was coaching, walk into my office and sit down in front of me and tell a genuine story about how they're going, I just see the weight of the world come off their shoulders. And I'm able to manage them better and coach them better and talk to them better and mentor them better. You know, it's dramatic when you see it in progress, you know, so it works. A strong man is a vulnerable man, is a man that says, I don't know all the answers, is a man that asks questions and says, I got it wrong. You know, but we're still battling with that notion. And I think it's a conversation that we continue to have, and we're much better at having it. There's no doubt about it.
And so, how would you, like, say, put yourself in a position for someone who's, you know, around other blokes or mates, and like, I really want to, you know, start this different conversation. You know, how do you sort of start that shift? You know, is it just creating that space to sort of make them feel comfortable? What are sort of the simple fundamentals of how you kind of create that environment to get someone going who's maybe not so great at speaking up?
Yeah, I mean, let's look at two different environments because they're quite dramatic. I mean, in the workplace, I think you can structure it. So in the workplace, if I'm a leader, which we talk about, you know, a boss, a small business guy, you know, start your week off by a simple conversation. Guys, how was your weekend? Any challenges? Anyone go through any challenges in the weekend? You know, just go around the room. So you can put systems in place to be able to do that. So in the workplace, I would encourage everyone that runs a business or is part of the business, even go and see your boss tomorrow and say, guys, look, would you mind if we do once a week a bit of a shout out? Just talk about our biggest challenges, our biggest wins, how we're genuinely feeling through the COVID. Outside the workplace, it's a little bit more difficult because we as Australians can be very jokey. We can be very, you know, we can laugh and we can carry on. And you know me, and I'm as bad as anyone at doing that sort of stuff. So what you have to then do as a group of guys is, look, guys, would you mind coming over to the house? And look, we are going to have a couple of beers, but I wouldn't mind just having a really good conversation. Articulate it. I think we've got to start to speak our truth and just to say, and then you might say, look, Rizzy, I don't feel like it tonight. Fantastic. You know, I'll grab Blake and I'll grab Dylan. I'll grab, but at least you know why you're coming over. You know, you're coming over to have a meaningful conversation. And then we'll go, and then we'll wander and watch the footy and we'll have a muck around. But guys, do you mind if we have an hour? So just articulate it. Give yourself some time to do it. I mean, even ringing up someone and say, look, I want to meet you at the bar, but can we have a meaningful conversation? What's wrong, Roosie? You know, and to be honest, if you get a really poor response 3 or 4 times in a row, you got the wrong friends. You know, you got the wrong people around you. And we all talk about the 3, whether it's 3, whether it's 5, you know, centers of influence in your life. Just get rid of them. You know, get the centers of influence that are going to make you a better person and the person you want to be. So you have to structure it. And you have to make a time for it, and you have to make sure that people around you understand that.
That's an interesting point around, you know, that point where you decide, you know, are the people I'm around the guys I want to be around? And a lot of us are scared of, you know, being alone and not having friends, and that's quite a difficult thing to want to do. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who might be listening or around who are in environments that they know don't work, but the fear of stepping out of that is almost too much to actually want to do that.
Yeah, it is. You're right. I mean, fear is a huge driver, isn't it? You know, and I think just be aware of what you're creating, though. So if you are going to stay in that environment because of the fear, understand what you're creating. You know, I talk about life is basically just a series of choices. Everything you do is a choice. What time I set the alarm? Do I brush my teeth? Do I have a shower? What colour pants do I put on? What colour t-shirt? Everything you do in life is a choice. So just understand the consequences of those choices, you know, and understand that if you are going to stay with that group, it is going to have some consequences. There's no doubt about it. Equally, if you extricate yourself from that group, that has consequences as well. Now, those consequences might be you are going to be a little bit lonely for a little while. You know, you might have to, you know, take up jogging again or going to the gym or just changing your routine, you know, to get, you know, go surfing and then all of a sudden you're connecting with another group of people. So you do have to make an effort. Nothing in life is really simple. You know, everything takes time and effort, but understand the consequences of all your decisions, and then you will make better decisions.
Yeah, I thought about it that way before. That's a good point of literally just working it out in your head and say, okay, I'm going to make this choice, but I know this is what's going to be the outcome of it, and I sort of own that. Yeah. Now I wouldn't mind shifting into probably your, you know, juicy area around leadership, and you touched on, you know, a bit before around vulnerability being, you know, a key part of that. Now, in terms of, you know, I guess in your eyes, defining, you know, what a leader is and what good leadership looks like, is that easy enough for you to do? Could you sort of explain how, like, what are the fundamentals that make up, you know, good, and this can be both men or women, just leadership in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think a leader's got to be really honest. I think a leader's got to be a really good communicator. I think a leader's got to have incredible self-awareness, a lack of ego, some ego, but not total ego. Vulnerability, empathy, you know, they're the real key areas. Again, if you had asked me 20 years ago, it would have been a completely different conversation. I talk about leadership now, getting out of your head and getting into your heart. That's where it's gone. It's gone from head to heart. Now, there are times when you've got to jump back up into your head, but it's swinging between head and heart, and mainly staying in heart, you know, caring for people, understanding what drives people. People want connection. People want to be part of something. So they'd be the biggest things I would say. If you want to be a leader, all right, it's hard to be a really good leader if you don't carry those characteristics or develop those characteristics. I mean, you can learn those things, but self-awareness is huge. Yeah, that is massive.
And from that, right? So say I'm here and I'm in a leadership position. I'm like, fuck, now think about it. You know, maybe these things are areas that I'm, you know, I don't quite get. What do you mean by come from the heart more than the head? Sort of, what would be your first, you know, where do I go? Like, to get my head around what it means to come from the heart, and how do I practice that?
Yeah, again, when I talk about that, it's really around building relationships. You know, if you want someone to do something, then the more that they think you care for them. And again, football clubs are amazing at this. And you read about Damien Hardwick and Richmond and St Kilda of recent times. A lot of their breakthroughs has come through building stronger relationships. So suddenly it's not this top-down, the Roosy told me because he was the coach. Roosy told me because he cares about me and he cares about this football club. You know, the CEO told me to do this because he cares about me and he cares about the performance of the football club. So it doesn't just become, I talk about, you know, you can talk about team or talent. You know, a talent-based leader is basically technically very good, but doesn't give a shit about the team. A team-based leader might have some technical, mightn't be as technically good, but he's got great awareness of team. So what he does, he's able to put some technical people around him and help him. But equally, he's able to drag people along with him because he creates a really good, safe environment. There's a lot of information now with Brene Brown around psychological safety, you know, creating psychological safety for people to speak up, you know, and a good leader has to do that. A good leader creates really good relationships. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what, you know, that head to heart is. Creating relationships, asking great questions, all right, not having all the answers, listening as a leader is really, really important. But it doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything all the time, but it's a conversation you have. Janoah, thanks very much for that suggestion. Really good. But do you understand why we're doing it this way? Can I just show you? Bang, 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 bang. Thanks, mate. Thanks, Roosy. That's great. Thanks for the conversation. So the next time you're not going to be intimidated walking in and having another discussion. But if I just go, mate, come on, don't be an idiot. That's absolute crap. You know, that's not going to work. What are you going to do? That's the last I'm going to hear about what you've got to say. And you might come up with the greatest idea of all time, but it's stuck in your head because I haven't connected with you and I haven't created a safe place for you to say your piece.
Yeah. And I guess on the sort of the flip side of that is, you know, are there some sort of things that you're seeing out there that people think make a good leader that you see as that almost pitfalls, you know, like the sort of the mistakes people are making that they think they should be doing, which are actually potentially working against them? And how does that sort of look?
I think at the moment you can look at politicians as the greatest example, you know, and I'm not a politician and I'm not political, but if you talk about honest communication, cross. If you talk about admitting we're wrong, cross. If you talk about vulnerability, cross. So, I mean, that's probably as Australian citizen, and I'm not a doctor and I'm not a politician, so in no way, shape or form am I having any sort of conversation around, you know, is masks right or wrong? Is isolation right or wrong? I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about, what are we asking of our leaders in this really difficult time? We're asking for them to be vulnerable. We're asking them for them to have great self-awareness. We're asking for them to say, look, I got that wrong, you know, and I apologize. I'm human. So that's a really good example of what we're seeing in our politicians. They're just lacking leadership. And because of that, they just don't build trust. And trust is a huge part of being a great leader. And I'm not suggesting it's easy. And as I said, I'm not sitting in any side of politics and I'm not making any sort of medical comment because I have no background. What I'm saying is, in order to create trust, whether that's a politician, whether it's a footy coach, whether it's a CEO, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be honest. You have to communicate. You have to say, I was wrong. You know, that's just the reality. Any book that you read on leadership, Jim Collins, who's done 30 years of studying at Stanford, Patrick Lencioni, I think his name is, Brene Brown, any of these, the data around leadership and high-performing teams is all the same. It all comes back to being a great leader that's a great communicator, that creates a really good environment, creates psychological safety, has honest conversations, and that's just end of story if you want to be a great leader.
Yeah. And do you think that, does it change at all under extreme duress and challenge like now, or do those fundamentals just stay the same? Was there anything that you go now, maybe sort of bring some more of this in? Does that make sense?
One of the best slides I've seen the boys do, Emil and Jared, is the trust slide that we put up. And one of the things on the bottom is under pressure. Do you do what's best for yourself, or do you do what's best for the team? Okay, so I'll say that again. Under pressure, as a leader, do you do what's best for yourself, or do you do what's best for the team? It's a really, really good analogy to understand what great leaders are. Because this notion of suddenly under pressure, I'm going to become this great leader, that's not the case. You build up habits over time, and then when the pressure comes on, you revert to team because all you've done over a period of time is talk about team. But you watch what happens. Bad leaders under pressure go back to themselves. Right. One of the greatest sayings I've ever heard, mate, is always back self-interest. Okay, you watch bad leaders under pressure, just worry about themselves and don't worry about the team. Okay, so when the pressure's on, that's when your habits come out, what you've created over a period of time. All right, and you just do it naturally. Yeah. All right. Do you do what's best for yourself as a poor leader, or do you do what's best for the team? That's what a great leader does.
Right. So it's doing the back end work before you come to being sort of under the pumps. Your fundamentals are strong. So when you're in that stress reactive, you got the solid default.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was a really good story I read. I wish I could remember the book's name, and it was about a company in America back in the early 80s, and they put out Tylenol and it was legitimately poison, and it was killing people. And what happened is, about 6 months before that, the CEO got his leadership team in, and they had a creed that the great grandfather had actually came up with when he made the company. It was why they existed as a company. And he actually thought to himself, we don't live this creed, we don't live this purpose. So they revisited about 6 months or 12 months before this enormous tragedy started to happen.
Yeah.
And all his staff agreed, yes, we believe in it. Yes, we love this creed. And then they started living it and breathing it day in, day out. And what he said in the book was that as soon as this thing happened, they just went back to their creed. And the question was asked him, was it a difficult period? He said, well, when I look back on it, no, because everything we did was based around our purpose and our creed. But it wasn't like, it was that, my point is they practiced it over and over again, and they talked about it. And they said, is this real? Is this something we believe in? And when this crisis hit, it was just, this is what we do.
Yep.
We live this creed as a team, and we will get through this. And they actually thought one of the things he said was, he thought, well, Tylenol was finished as a brand. There was no way known that 12 months later, it was outselling itself because people trusted what they did during this period. And they not only did they maintain trust in the brand, they built trust over one of the worst periods in the history of their company. And it was fantastic, a really interesting case study for me to read around that concept.
Right. And was that tying in that work around sort of core values as well? Was that?
Yeah. So really, it's what's your purpose? Why do you exist? What's your core values? What are your behaviours? If you're really strong on that, and then everything just comes back to it. Yeah, everything comes back to, but you have to talk about it. You can't just put a banner on the wall and say, "Oh God, this is what we are." People just walk past it. You got to talk about it. You got to practice it. You got to action it. And then, whether in good times or bad, it just becomes what we do. It becomes a habit. And it's a really, as I said, the more you read, the more you understand how important that is what is culture. It's simply the behaviours reward and challenge, and then it becomes a habit over time.
Yeah. I remember, I know Blakey just mentioned it down there in terms of, the Bloods culture, and we did the work on it. We sort of said rev it up, and it's actually really simplified it for us to have like this overarching name or word that represents these fundamentals. And you sort of ask, are we, I think you said it as, is he a blood? And we're like, did you rev it up? And that really simplified it for us as well, instead of having a list of 6 values and naming this and definitions and all that. It's just like an overarching label for it. Yeah,
exactly. And so many companies I walk into and they do overcomplicate it. But if you can have some really simple, a simple purpose, some values, but the behaviours, the way we act, and if you can put some sort of catch cry above it, it's really good. I mean, obviously the Bloods sort of came from our connection to South Melbourne. I think it was Heath James that brought up at one of the end of the meetings that someone said, well, why don't we call it the Bloods? But the important thing about that was the catch cry then led to the behaviours. So we would review every game, and at the end of the review, we'd say to the players, righto guys, who was a Blood today and who wasn't? So I was, tick, I wasn't. And then we'd have some conversation. Often someone would say, hang on, Stewie, I thought you were a Blood. And I'd say, well, okay, well, tell him why. Why did you think? Well, here are our behaviours. This is what I think he ticked that off, he ticked that off and that off. Well, Stewie, what do you think? Okay, yeah, I agree. So we had some really good conversation. But you have to have a really clear understanding of how you want to act. What are your behaviours? If you get that, everything else falls into place, really.
And I guess in a way that by doing that, you're also creating some intention behind a vulnerable conversation. So it's not just having a go at someone for whatever. It's like, well, this is the intention behind it. We've discussed this in sort of more of a safer space, I suppose, for those vulnerable or open conversations.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, Janoah, often when a footy club's process gets discussed, a lot of it's around the discipline. The leadership group at Hawthorn discipline, Luke Hodge, the leadership group at Sydney discipline. But let me tell you, it's so much about wrapping their arms around that player. So if someone does something wrong, the next thing is, guys, how can we help you get better? And I've seen it time and time and time and time again. It's pointing out the mistake, but then the most important part about the process is, rightio, Roosie, we're now going to help you. I'll turn up in the morning. I'll pick you up on the way to training. I'll make sure you get there on time, and I'll help you. So that's really fundamental. It's not just pointing out people's mistakes all the time. And a lot of the feedback around your behaviours has to be positive. Well done. Well done, Janoah. Well done, Blake. Well done, Dylan. Well done. Because people want to be valued when they go to work. And all of a sudden, if you're in a South Melbourne, a Sydney Swans review, and we're up there and we're talking about the behaviours, and 10 players get ticked and everyone goes, oh, well done, guys, well done, guys. If you're sitting a young player at the back of the room, you're going, I want to be like that. Yeah. That's pretty cool. When Stewie Maxfield says to me, well done. So I'm listening to the positive stuff as well. I'm listening, thinking, oh, okay, they've rewarded Adam Goods for this. They've rewarded Mick O'Loughlin for this. I want to get rewarded. It's pretty cool in front of, 45 blokes after a team meeting and a win where someone says, well done, that was awesome. So you have to give positive feedback as well. 4-to-1 ratio, positive to negative feedback. But it's also, as I said, give solutions, not just creating problems. Give people an opportunity to act their way into the system or act their way out of the system.
Right. Is there any one around, like, I know you've mentioned a few names and books and obviously the clubs you've worked with, but, other examples of people who you think are sort of doing this stuff well? If I was like, watch this going, all right, I want to see some more of that in action. Are there any other, whether it's a business or other teams that are doing this well?
If anyone, and you probably have, but the first thing I'd recommend people to do is watch The Last Dance with the Chicago Bulls. I mean, if you haven't seen that, it's a must-watch 10-part documentary, and it really looks at high performance. Some of it is a little bit outdated in terms of some of the behaviours, but in terms of the concepts, really good. Blake's talking about Legacy, which is a really, really good book. Now, for those who don't know, it's about the All Blacks. And we were really fortunate. We had the All Blacks visit us at the Sydney Swans. I think it was about 2004, 2005. We had a really good discussion around their legacy. Some of Phil Jackson's books are really, really interesting. Brene Brown's got a couple of really good books. Jim Collins has got some really good books. So there's just a few. But for those of you that love the visual side of The Last Dance, have you seen it, Janoah?
Yeah. I watched it.
I mean, it's just an incredible 10-part series that just sums up high performance. Michael Jordan's the driver of high performance. Phil Jackson's the relationship guy, the empathy guy, the meditator and the challenger and the glue. And Jordan just drives relentlessly high standards. It's not great at relationships, but it's the two of them together that make that, incredible high-performing team and a great bond. So that's a must-watch for everyone.
Yeah. It was an absolute belter. That's a good recommendation, actually. And obviously, Blake, he loves his All Blacks.
Well, I was a bit disappointed with Blake because he started off doing like a book club thing, and he had like 20 books up there. Mine wasn't in the book club, so I did have to give him a reminder that probably the greatest book ever written is called Here It Is by my favourite author.
Oh yeah,
which is
me.
Again?
Yeah.
Paul Roos. Yeah.
I don't think Blake's. I think I saw it on the ground, somewhere under his bed before. I'm not sure if he's actually read it yet. I'll have to give him a.
No. I heard it was keeping the door open actually.
He actually used it to lean up his phone when he's on his lives.
He's now claiming he read it 7 times. That's not true at all.
No. So, mate, before we wrap it up, I just would love to. I know you touched on a couple of these things before. Just sort of when we're talking about sort of being a man in the current world, whether you're a leader or not, how would you define that? What are the sort of the key characteristics that you say now or feel make up a man? Yeah,
I think when we're putting into perspective what vulnerability is, I think just transparency, honesty. Like if someone says, "How are you?" give them an honest answer. And I think what we've got to start to say as a group of blokes is give give each other space, listen, ask questions, take time to sort of help each other. And I think we're getting a lot better at doing that. But just this notion, I would just say be transparent and be honest. Be who you are, not who you think we want you to be or who we thought you wanted me to be 20 years ago. Be who you are. Be yourself and encourage all your mates to be themselves. And let's just start having some just honest, transparent conversations, which then will lead to some really good solutions and helping each other out. And as I said before, I have no doubt when someone understands what your problem is, they're going to be helping you. And you'll have the weight of the world on your shoulders, because suddenly you'll realise there's way more people with the same problem than just you. Like, oh, yeah, Roosy, I'm going through that as well. Oh, shit, really? Yeah. How did you deal with it? Oh, well, I dealt with it this way or this way. So I would just say, be transparent, be honest, be authentic, just be yourself, not who, because I think we can sort of go the other way now and get put in a box at times, so like what is the role and how complicated it can become for blokes in today's society. Just be yourself. I say to Dylan all the time, and you probably heard me say it, just be a good person. There's not enough good people walking around. Let me tell you that. Be a good person. If we can be all good persons and start the day like that, then the world's going to be a far, far better place.
And it's amazing how, a lot of us are often waiting for someone else to do that first. We're sort of holding back. And it's like, if you're the one who own it and you take that first step, it's amazing the response that you can get or the shift that you can create by having the balls to do that.
Yeah, exactly. And, I guess one of the fortunate things that being involved in football for many, many years is knowing so many people, and a number of them. Bram, anyone that's got a book, Bram's just type your book in, mate. He's just got a book out. And it's a great book. But Bram, Torsten Casper's on the call, and all the people I know on the call, and they're all doing the same thing. So there's enough of us creating this wave around how we're going to act. So just because you're not, a footballer, or you're not running a big company, or you're not, a movie star, it doesn't mean people aren't watching you and aren't valuing what you do and aren't looking at you. I go down to it's about as far as I can get at the moment. But I go down to the local coffee shop, mate. That's about, a K away. That's as far as the Victorians can go. But even down there, I'm always watching people at the coffee shop. I'm watching what they're doing. I'm talking to, the local builder and the architect and all that. And I'm really interested in how they're acting, how they're behaving, how they're, looking after each other. So you're right. Everyone can make a difference. And I think the more of us that make that difference, the better we are, and in a really, really difficult, tough time for everyone.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good point. Obviously, that's what, one of the things that we're now trying to create with Momentum is now that we're shifting out to a weekly sort of circle of lads. We can start having those conversations, and pretty much a lot of what you were talking about is to start that simple chat. It doesn't have to be big, which is
and I mean, there's a funny thing that we all heard as kids. I'm just plugging in my phone, mate. I'm having IT problems, and my IT man Dylan's not around.
Mate,
there's more. I've got more. There's more leads here than the Melbourne forward line, I tell you. Hang on. So
that's right, mate.
Sorry, what was
we've already gone overtime, so we've only got a couple of minutes to go, and I'll let you go.
Yeah, no, it's fine. No, but I think just being that good person and helping each other out, and as I said, there's a lot of people doing some really good stuff, and your conversations, and we all heard the story that there's no such thing as a dumb question, but we all know 10, 15 years ago you got slaughtered for a dumb question, but that's not the case anymore. I think that's one of the examples now, and having been involved in the footy club where, geez, you wouldn't want to open your mouth 30 years ago because someone would jump down your throat. Now, I generally believe there's no such thing as a dumb question or thinking you're going through something. So what you're doing, and Dylan and Blake, is fantastic. So I would encourage so much and I say this all the time, if anyone on the call wants to reach out to me, reach out. I typically get back to people as much as I can. You know, reach out to yourself and Blake and Dylan and have the conversation. Don't be scared to have the conversations. You know, people will respond positively now, whereas maybe 15, 20, 25 years ago they wouldn't have. But I guarantee they will now. And if they don't, get rid of them. Discard them from your community and hang out with people that do want to be vulnerable and do want to have some conversations and do want to make a difference.
And it's good people. Well, actually, now when I hear like a bloke or woman, you know, say, I don't know, or I was wrong, or share, actually, weirdly enough, I have more respect for them than less, even knowing that they might be battling a bit. It's just a weird little click for me now. I'm like, oh, you know, I respect that you had the guts to just throw it out there.
100%. And what it does is it completely disarms the other person because they're ready for a fight. So if you come up to me and go, Roos, I go, mate, I apologise. You've got nowhere to go. It's like, oh, shit. Oh, wow. Okay. All right. And then you can start having a meaningful conversation. You know, well, Roosie, why did you do that? I said, look, I'm sorry, mate. I was just having a really bad day. I really apologise. I shouldn't have done it. And then your follow-up question is, oh, is everything okay? And I go, well, no, not really. And you go, oh, shit, I didn't realise. You know, I apologise. I said, no, mate, that's fine. You didn't know. I should have told you. So suddenly, by saying I was wrong or apologising, you've opened the gate up to this authentic conversation, you know, rather than putting this sort of stiff arm up and stopping someone from barging down the door. It's a really great way to continue a meaningful conversation.
Yeah. Well, that seems like that was, I was going to sort of say to you, because we're sort of pushing over time now, so we'll have to jump off before we get cut off. I think it cuts off in and out. You know, the last thing would be like, you know, what was something that you maybe wish you'd learnt or implemented earlier? Would it be around that honest, vulnerable conversation piece? Would be one of the biggest, you know, learnings that you've had that you maybe wished you'd embodied earlier?
Yeah, it's funny. I asked myself a question last night. It was, I don't know why, but I was in bed and I don't think I could sleep. I asked myself if I could tell young Paul Roos something, what would I tell him? It's actually quite funny when you know you're going mad in isolation when you're talking to yourself too. I think Tammy must have fallen asleep. So I'm in Victoria, I'm in isolation. So you start talking to yourself. The worst part is if you start answering yourself. Like talking to yourself is bad, but answering yourself is worse. And then worse than that, if that's the best conversation you've had all day, that becomes a real problem, you know, with yourself. I think when I look back on it, just probably asking more questions and writing things down. I think I would have loved to have been able to do that. And as a result of that, probably to the people listening, just have more awareness, you know, just look at things differently. And if there are some notes, I've never been a journaler, I've never sort of taken it down. But when I was talking to myself last night, I sort of thought, geez, I wish I had written more stuff down. Right. And I wish I I think I was pretty observant, but I wish I could have had it on paper to remember it. So I think my message is, apart from all the other ones we've spoken about, I think journaling is pretty cool. I think write stuff down, the good stuff, the bad stuff. And then it's a really good way to hold you accountable. I did it at the end of 1998. And I wrote down the things I liked about my coaches, and it was the only time I'd really did it. And to be honest, it was the best document I've ever written in my life. And I had it for 8.5 years coaching Sydney, and I took it out when I coached the Melbourne Footy Club. The things I liked about my coaches and things I didn't like about my coaches. So I'd really encourage the people listening to really start to write them things down. You know, particularly the younger ones. You know, it doesn't matter how young you are. I know your young mate Fletcher's on the call. He still goes to school. So if I was talking to young Paul Roos now, I'd say, Roosie, write down as much stuff as you can, you know, and for no other reason than, you know, one day you'll look back on it and go, okay, yeah, that's really good. Now I can use that. At the time, yeah, you mightn't think it's actually that valuable, but you'd be surprised. It's like, how do you put an old head on young shoulders? I mean, it's bloody hard to do. So I would just say write some stuff down and then all the other stuff, mate, we've had a good conversation about tonight.
Mate, there's some absolute gems. There's a few people down here saying thanks and appreciate the words, mate. That was really solid and juicy.
Yeah, thanks, mate. That's good. And what you guys are doing is fantastic, and it's great work. And there's Dom. My mate Dom's from Noosa. Look at him. He's probably out there sunbaking right now, even though it's the middle of the night. He's going down to get his good coffee. Dom down at. Don't we all miss Noosa? How many on the call miss going to Queensland? I'm telling you. Hey,
mate, we're on the border, mate. You're gonna come.
You're on the border.
Yeah.
I know, it's unbelievable. Jules is there too. Gee whiz, Jules and Dom, and no, it's been good, mate. Well done. I really enjoyed it, and yeah, we just got to continue to have more conversations like this, and what you, Blake, and Dylan are doing is fantastic. So, thanks, mate.
Awesome, mate. Cheers for your time.
Thanks, mate. Good on you. But how do I get this off now? What do I do? What do I do now? Where's my IT guy? Where is he?
Mate. Just take it with you.
Can someone help me? Bram, can you help me, mate? What's going on?
Put it on your pillow. We can talk to you later.
Oh, I don't know what to do. Help. So that's 57. That's generation. I used to play Pac-Man and Pong. That's about the extent of my IT knowledge. All right.
Well, I think... yeah.
All right.
You lost everyone.
See you guys. Good on you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yeah, mate.